I'm going to be your host for the entire FIFA World Cup 2022. On this channel, we drop daily predictions, daily previews, and no house advantage videos. So if you haven't subscribed, go hit that subscribe button. Before we jump in to day 7 World Cup predictions, I do have an offer for you from BetMGM. All you have to do is deposit $10, bet $10 on any World Cup pregame money line, and you get $200 of free bets in your account. That means if someone scores a goal in the World Cup, or if someone scores a goal today, you win $200 in free bets. So make sure you hit the link in our description, or it'll be pinned in the first comment. Let's dive in to the first game, Tunisia taking on Australia. Now, Group D is still wide open for both of these teams. We have France on top with 3 points. We then have Denmark and Tunisia with 1 point each, and then obviously the Socceroos at the bottom with 0 points. Now, Tunisia played Denmark and they drew 0-0. To be honest, Tunisia looked very, very good. I didn't expect them to come into that game, defend how they did. Denmark had clear-cut opportunities, probably could have scored 2 or 3 goals, but didn't take them. Tunisia really looked like a good, solid African side. They were basically playing at home with the amount of Tunisia support in that stadium, but Denmark really should have stepped up and claimed the 3 points there. They can find themselves lucky, and now they might have a shot of qualifying for the knockout stages. Now, Australia took on France, and we all know about the Champions Curse. Spain won the World Cup in 2010. It looked very much like the Champions Curse might take place when Australia scored the first goal in the 9th minute. 1-0 to Australia. Who would have thought that that scoreline was even possible? But then France, even with all their injuries of Nkunku, Conte, Pogba, Benzema, they showed their quality. They came back. Kylian Mbappe got a goal and an assist. Griot got 2, and they beat Australia 4-1. So I think the Champions Curse chat might be out of the window. It's still definitely possible. It's still definitely possible if France and Denmark tie or France lose to Denmark. But I do think this Tunisia team will be licking their lips at this Australia game, thinking that they can get a result out of this. I do think it'll be close. I think Australia will be able to score. But at the end of the day, I think Tunisia's quality will come through and they'll be able to grab this win. So I'm going for the Tunisian money line, Tunisia to win at plus 110. Now, I know I just called Group D extremely open, but Group C is a gaping gap open. We've got Poland taking on Saudi Arabia, and it's open because Saudi Arabia are sitting at the top of Group C. Poland and Mexico are tied, and then Argentina are in 4th with 0 points. Saudi Arabia pulled off one of the best miracles I've seen in World Cup history. Before kickoff, the odds for Saudi Arabia to win were 25-1. So that would make it the biggest upset since 2006, since they've been tracking the data in a World Cup. To be fair, Argentina looked very dangerous in that first half. They probably should have had 3 or 4, but Saudi Arabia stuck to their game plan of having a high defensive line and trying to catch Argentina offside. It worked perfectly. If they played that game over another 100 times, that result would not happen again. Everything fell right for that Saudi Arabian team. Argentina couldn't stay on side. They didn't take their opportunities, and Saudi Arabia had 2 shots, and both of them went in to beat Argentina 2-1 and make World Cup history. Now, Poland, on the other hand, wasn't an exciting game at all against Mexico. A 0-0 draw. Mexico looked the better side from start to finish, but Mexico did give Poland a penalty, which Robert Lewandowski missed. You can't make this stuff up, honestly. 0-0 draw. Poland looked in tatters against that Mexico side. Can lightning strike twice? Will Saudi Arabia pull off another upset here? To be honest, I don't think they will. I think they're going to be emotionally exhausted after that Argentina win. You hit high, you swing low. I think we're going to see Poland dominate this game. Poland are going to find some form and beat this Saudi Arabian team. So for me, I'm going for the Polish money line at odds of minus 135. Our third fixture is France taking on Denmark. Now, we know what happened with France and Denmark in the Nations League. Denmark beat them 2-0 and 2-1. So France...
Oh, by the way, Adam, I don't know if you looked at the Dynasty store. It says there's a Black Friday sale, and then if you try to filter by Black Friday, nothing comes up.
Interesting. Yeah, I'd actually meant to look yesterday if they were doing one, because this time last year is when I bought 4 TVs and a ton of them.
It says there's a Black Friday sale from the 25th to the 28th, so it's not like it's imminent or anything, but there was a part of me was like, oh, I want to look early just in case stuff sells out, and there's stuff I would actually want. One thing I was disappointed by, though, is there's... I do think you can find some of the sales if you just look. It's just not convenient. But there was an 85-inch TV that was like 700,000 crowns marked down. But I only have 1.2 million crowns. It was 1.4 million.
That sucks.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the Stokastic NBA Strategy Show. I hope you guys all had a great Thanksgiving. And I'd say what we would be appreciative of, some likes, some subscriptions to the YouTube channel, but also Black Friday today. And we have one of the best deals that we have ever run at Stokastic for the holiday / Black Friday, the big shopping holiday. Because right now, if you sign up using the promo code THANKS, THANKS, you get 1 week of all the tools we have for every single sport for only $5. So this is a 90% off sale, and you get access to everything for $5. So player projections, ownership projections, all the different tools we have, like Boom Bust Tool for NBA and NFL. You get access to all of that for pretty much every single DFS sport out there for $5. So if you've not signed up, take advantage of this opportunity and use that promo code THANKS at checkout to get your discount. Now, Adam, we've got a big NBA slate today, 12 games to talk about. But first, how's Thanksgiving for you?
It was good. I just went down to my mom's, hung out. We're doing the small family get-together tomorrow. So, yeah, nothing exciting. Just hung out, watched football, lost some money as usual. Yeah. So, you know.
And the football games were more or less a mess for the most part. The final game was pretty fun. I guess the Bills-Lions game was also really entertaining. Really entertaining from a viewership standpoint. It never really felt like, at least to me, and maybe this was just a bias, I never actually felt like the Bills were going to lose. It seemed kind of inevitable they were going to win, even when Josh Allen seemed like he couldn't throw a football. But then when he had to, he made the throws. Particularly the second half, I don't think he had more than 2 accurate passes. And they were the final 2 passes he had to throw: the touchdown pass to Diggs, and then like the 70-yard laser beam over the middle. So clock management terrible in across the games though.
Yeah, definitely pulled it together at the end. My favorite part of that first game was just like Tony Romo had to have been blackout drunk for that game. Like he was just like all over the place.
I'd prefer that too than the Giants-Cowboys game where it was just every Odell Beckham every 90 seconds like this. Right. I hope he signs with neither of those teams and it's just somewhere else and they just look like it is. They made the whole game was about Odell Beckham for some reason. It was very bizarre, but yeah. Basketball today, 12 games, and as per usual on a 12-game slate, there's a whole lot of injury news that is going to shape everything that's going on. And we're going to start with the Minnesota Timberwolves at the Charlotte Hornets. And Minnesota Timberwolves, they are healthy, and we've got the same scenario you and I usually talk about. Good matchup against the Charlotte Hornets, but we've got players in the Minnesota Timberwolves who individually have a lot of upside. Kind of hard to know on a day-to-day basis who that might be between Cat, Anthony Edwards, D'Angelo Russell, Gobert. Are any of these individual players standing out to you above the others in this matchup, though?
No, I think it's more of the same. You're certainly happy to get to any of these guys. They're all going to be good plays. But on a slate of this size, you're just going to have shorthanded teams. You're going to have injuries. And so if you have a healthy team, like they're just not going to stand out as much. So I do think that we've seen the pricing come down a little bit on Minnesota over the last couple of games to where they're a little bit more appealing to get to. But yeah, I wouldn't say any of them stand out individually.
Yeah, and then we've got the same injury scenario from the other day in terms of Kyle Anderson is listed as questionable. Now, not that this is a monument. What's that?
Is this game not on the slate?
Oh, that's right. I forgot that this is the 5 o'clock game. Never mind.
I was kind of talking out of my ass while I was trying to pull stuff up on the site, and I'm just like, I can't find it.
So just a force of habit for me. I wrote all the games down, and yeah, totally forgot that one of these games is a 5 o'clock game and is not. I don't even. Why would this game be at 5 o'clock?
I have no idea. I didn't know it was. I was more confused why it wasn't in our tools, but
yeah, I didn't look at the start times either. I just wrote all of the games down, and I guess I was looking at the all-day pricing. So screw this. I'm an idiot. We'll call it. I don't drink, but we'll call it a Thanksgiving hangover anyway. Let's move on to the next game. Philadelphia at Orlando. So from the Philadelphia side of the game, this injury scenario, Matisse Thybulle's out, the less impactful injury of the entire team. But then Joel Embiid is out, Tyrese Maxey's out, James Harden is out. We've seen prices go up on guys like D'Anthony Melton, Shake Milton, Tobias Harris. But what do you like from this team? Is there any pricing value left?
Yes, I mean, we have seen the prices come up a bit. You're sitting now on DraftKings at $8,200 on Melton. $8K for Tobias Harris still looks fine. Shake Milton at $6K, I think, still a little bit underpriced. So, you know, you're paying a premium for them now, but at the same time, with these guys out, you are certainly in a better spot. Joel Embiid already ruled out again. So I still think they look good, just not the level of priority that they were previously. I also wanted to double check on Wednesday. Did they put so Saban Lee still didn't play, wasn't in the rotation. That's one potential piece that ends up kind of screwing things up. If we get a game where he steps in and just plays like 12 minutes and, Melton and Milton go from 34, 36 to like 32, that's going to be a problem. But with the rotation we saw last game, Harris played 37, Melton played 37, Milton played 39. So if we assume that same sort of rotation for those guys, then they still look fine at their respective salaries.
Yeah, and it's not quite the same value that we were seeing before, where guys were a lot cheaper. But I want to know, what do you make of the center rotation? Because between Montrezl Harrell and Paul Reed, actually both of them ended up being great from a fantasy standpoint last game. The minutes, it does look like it's going to be somewhat of a split, but with a potential lean towards whoever's playing better between the two of them. Between Paul Reed and Montrezl Harrell, is there anything of those two that you like in the front court for tournaments?
So that's how I see it as well. We got the 48-minute split from them 2 games ago, which from like a macro standpoint is just good for both guys, because we in that particular game it was great for Paul Reed, but he was playing really well. You kind of just couldn't take him off the floor. Then last game you got 44 minutes combined. That's how I've typically been projecting them, because I think in competitive games very frequently you're going to see that closing lineup with PJ Tucker at the 5, which is what we got against Charlotte. You had the closing lineup of Milton, Melton, Harris, Niang, and PJ Tucker. I think that's very likely to be the closing lineup in competitive games, whether that's Niang or Korkmaz or House, doesn't matter for the purpose of this conversation. But I think that from a projection standpoint, you're probably doing something like 22-22 for Harrell Reed, or 23 Harrell, 21 Reed, since Harrell's starting, like however you want to do it. But I think that there is still upside there, because if one of them plays well, then they are likely to pick up more minutes. What stands out right now, though, is that those prices really came up. And so you're not getting ownership there anymore. Paul Reed, 4.5% ownership at 4,800. Trez, less than 1% at 4,900. So you can still go there in tournaments, just because, like, for example, the first game this year that Montrezl Harrell started, he played 30 and Reed played 18. If you get a game where Harrell plays 30 minutes at 4,900, that's something I would want at no ownership. The problem is he's at a price now where if he plays 22 minutes, he's probably not going to get there, and the same goes for Paul Reed.
Yeah, and it's also, we have 13 games on the slate. I had it listed as 14, but obviously because I'm an idiot, I include the first game. So actually 13 games on the slate. There's going to be so much value, especially, there was no game yesterday. There was some players that were off on Wednesday. So I do think we're going to end up seeing a lot of value for tonight's slate. And it's going to mean guys like Paul Reed and Montrezl Harrell, with the price uptick, they're just not going to project particularly well relative to some of the other value options we got. So this is the least amount of Sixers that I'm going to have rostered in, 2-3 weeks of slate they've been on.
Yeah, it feels good.
Yeah, one team we don't have to worry about. And on the other side of the game, another team as well where it's a little bit different, because Paulo Banchero, he had a monster start to his rookie season, but has not played for the last few games. He's off the injury report. He is presumably going to be back. Wendell Carter Jr. is questionable, though. But starting with Banchero, how does his return impact the other Magic players?
It pretty much makes everybody look worse, because prices adjusted while he was out, and pretty much every player on this team, at least one of two things is going to be true. Either you expect them to lose playing time with Banchero back, or you expect them to lose production with Banchero back, or both. So, if Wendell Carter Jr. misses, then sure, there are some more minutes available. Maybe Bamba starts, maybe Bull, maybe Bull starts, but or maybe Okiki starts rather. But you're assuming Carter is in, you're likely losing playing time for Bol. He's somebody that we had seen kind of in that like 25 to 30 minute range, except for when Banchero and Carter were both out. One thing we were seeing prior to Banchero's injury, and I'm actually curious to see how this goes, Mo Bamba hadn't really been a heavy part of that rotation. And then they started, kind of working him back in once Banchero went out. He started playing like pretty heavy minutes. So I don't know exactly what they'll do there, but if Bamba remains an actual part of this rotation, that's not good for Bull either. But then, Franz Wagner wasn't great with Banchero out. He was around a fantasy point per minute without him on the floor, but he had like a 30% usage rate and a mid-20s assist percentage. Those numbers come down with Banchero out there. Suggs' usage rate should come down a bit. It really makes this team unappealing.
Yeah, that's where I'm at too. And I kind of just hope Wendell Carter Jr. plays, and then it's like, all right, let's see how this plays out. I don't really have to roster anything from Orlando, and there's a lot of teams on the slate, so it'd be one spot that we could look past. But if Wendell Carter does sit, it's kind of hard to know exactly what the starting lineup will look like just because Boncaro is also returning. But I guess the best possible scenario for value would be just Mo Bamba starts at center. But even then, Bol could play center minutes. I don't know exactly if there'd be any one guy that I'd be dying to get to. But if Wendell Carter Jr. doesn't play, do you view Mo Bamba as a really strong tournament option?
Not really. So I still just don't at 6,400. I don't feel great about what the playing time would look like. I would say he's certainly playable if he starts in place of Carter, but I still don't know, exactly how that works. We have Mo Wagner off the injury report as well. He's been out like the entire year. That's a body that they could use in the front court that just screws everything up too. So I'd still think he's pretty risky, but at 6,400, if Carter plays, Bamba's pretty clearly not playable. If he starts, you can at least consider him, but there's going to be plenty of other guys to look very similar, if not better.
So let's move to New York, where the Portland Trailblazers are going to be in Madison Square Garden to take on the Knicks. And on the Portland side, I think there's an interesting injury that people might not really take note of because Drew Eubanks is questionable. We know Nurkic is a really good pointsman and fantasy producer over the last few years with Damian Lillard off the court, but the playing time hasn't always been consistent for Nurk. If Eubanks doesn't play, I think Nurkic becomes one of the best center plays on the slate because I don't think that they're just going to immediately say like, okay, Watford steps into the Eubanks role or something like that. I think there's potential for Nurkic to have really solidified minutes if Eubanks doesn't play. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think it at the very least increases the likelihood of that happening. And the other part of this is that Lillard is still out as well. So not only do you get that increased production that you mentioned, but you don't have that risk of, that we've gotten when this team is fully healthy where Justice Winslow closes over Yusuf Nurkic. If that were the case, then obviously Eubanks doesn't matter because he's not the one closing over Nurkic. But you already have Winslow filling that Damian Lillard spot in the closing lineup. So you expect Nurkic to get the closing minutes if it's competitive. And then there's also a pretty good chance during the course of a game that you're just going to get a couple extra minutes given to Nurkic because Eubanks isn't out there. We've seen that frequently this year when you get the backup center out. Teams typically just give a couple extra minutes to the starter because your third string center is your third string center. So I'm with you. I think Nurk looks good one way or the other, but I do think he looks even better if Eubanks sits.
And then another player from here that I think is worth mentioning, Justice Winslow remains really cheap, $4,100 on DK, $4,400 on FanDuel. He moved to the starting lineup for Portland last game, and we saw Shaedon Sharpe go back to the bench. As a starter, Winslow played 28 minutes last game, but also keep in mind, this was a game that was decided by 18 points, and had it been a little more competitive, and Winslow, had he played well, because he didn't play well either, I think there's potential for him to play 30-plus minutes at a relatively cheap price point. Assuming Winslow starts, is he a good value play today?
I think so. And we had seen him get those minutes earlier in the year, too. He's started 4 games this year with Damian Lillard out, and he's averaged 29.8 minutes per game, 0.95 DraftKings points per minute. I think he's underpriced here, assuming he remains in the starting lineup. You have small forward and power forward eligibility as well, which is nice. I'm with you as long as he starts. I think Winslow actually looks like a good value.
And then anything else from Portland that you think is worth mentioning here?
Simons, the rest of the starters, I think, are all fair. Simons is around a 1.15 DraftKings point per minute guy without Lillard on the floor. He's likely to give you 35 to 37 minutes in 5 games without Lillard this year. 38 minutes per game, 1.12 DraftKings points per minute, 28.5% usage rate, 28% assist percentage. There's obviously a very nice ceiling there. Jeremy Grant plays a lot. Josh Hart plays a lot. I think Hart's probably the least appealing of the group.
Yeah, I would agree with that, especially because Hart's usage has been insanely low this year, like to a point that it doesn't even make sense. I can't remember who I was doing. I think it was actually Emac who I was doing a show with last Friday, and I'm doing it again with him this Friday, where he had said to me, "What would you guess Josh Hart's usage is this year?" And off the top of my head, I knew it was low, but I didn't know exactly what it was. His usage is like 12% this year. He is not taking shots, so the rebounds are there for him, the assists, but it's hard to have a lot of fantasy upside when you're just not shooting the ball at all. So I totally agree with that.
And to just touch on it really quick, because I think we actually didn't specifically say it, but Rolando Castanon asked if he missed it, that we didn't talk about Banchero himself. He's 8,600 on DraftKings. I'm not expecting to get there. I don't know if he'll be on any sort of minutes limit or not, but he's at pretty much the most expensive price we've gotten from him all year in his first game after missing a couple weeks with injuries. So I'm not expecting to go there either.
I would be stunned if he plays a full minutes allotment. Not to say that he's going to play 24, but if he plays it, I don't think he plays his normal role, and the price is already up. So that would be an easy player for me to avoid. On the Knicks side of this game, We've got Mitchell Robinson questionable, Cam Reddish questionable, Derrick Rose questionable. I think the most interesting scenario for the Knicks is the backcourt. The Mitchell Robinson being questionable. The front court's been a mess with the center rotation the entire year. I don't really want anything to do with it. But in the backcourt, with Cam Reddish and Derrick Rose both questionable, if they're out, I assume Quentin Grimes is going to stick in the starting lineup. He's still relatively cheap on both DraftKings and FanDuel. He's actually min price over on FanDuel. And then DraftKings, is he 35? Yeah, 3,500 on FanDuel, 3,500 on DraftKings. Is that a playable price point for Grimes at both Rose and we also see Cam Reddish out so that he would stick in the starting lineup?
Yeah, if they're both out, I mean, we've seen really healthy playing time from that role in general, whether it's Reddish or Grimes recently. In New York's last game, Grimes started. He played 33 and a half minutes. He's not a great point per minute guy, but he's not horrible. And at 3,500, I think that's going to be a pretty useful value if he's in the starting lineup.
Yeah, so it would be very contingent on him starting and other guys being out, but something to keep an eye on. And I do presume that he would be starting if those players are ruled out. As for the pay-up options on the Knicks, Barrett, Brunson, Randall, are any of them standouts for you today?
Not really. Brunson played 34 minutes last game without Rose. I was kind of hoping you were going to get a little bit more because that was another situation, sort of like we've talked about with the backup centers, where you're getting 48 minutes a night from Jalen Brunson plus Derrick Rose. And we'd actually seen Derrick Rose be playing a little bit more recently, getting to like that 15-minute mark more frequently. So you were only getting 33, or if Rose got to 16, 32 minutes from Brunson. Last game, Brunson still only played 34. Miles McBride played pretty much the backup role. And played 14 and a half minutes. So I think Brunson maybe looks marginally better if Rose is out, but one way or the other, he looks pretty similar. He's 7,300, not getting any ownership. There's not really any ownership coming into this team, which I think is fine. It's just there's, outside of Grimes, there's not really injuries that are impacting much of anything. So on a slate this size, I just don't think they're going to stand out.
The next game, another New York team, the Brooklyn Nets, taking on the Indiana Pacers. And the Nets, they are looking a lot different these days, particularly Ben Simmons, now that it looks like he's worked the rust off. Totally different looking player as of now compared to the first few weeks of the season where he was airballing layups. The usage was really low. It seemed like the confidence wasn't there. Simmons is right now not only scoring a little bit better, but the usage, the assists, the playmaking, that's been way up as well. I don't love the fit with him and Nick Claxton in the front court, but at least in the last game, in the last couple of games, it doesn't seem like it's impacting Ben Simmons' production individually too much. He's been a really popular play as of late, Simmons, but for today, his price has gone up a little bit. Still remains popular, though. He's $7,200 over on DraftKings. FanDuel priced up to $8,000, still around 20% owned on both sites. What do you make of the ownership on Simmons and the uptick in salary?
I think that both are fine. Like, he was just wildly underpriced the last couple of games. 6,300, had a big game. Naturally dropped to 6,100 because why wouldn't he? So getting him up to 7,200, to me, this is an example of a player that was like really underpriced now becoming mildly underpriced. And so you can't just look at it and say like, oh, his price tag went up $1,000. He's automatically too expensive now. Like, he was just completely mispriced before. He's playing big minutes, played another 32 and a half last game, would have played more had that been competitive down to the end, subbed out with about 4 minutes left to go in that game. And he's playing well, like you said. This is somebody that we had been harping on all season long, much to the dismay of people in chat that were convinced Ben Simmons was never going to be a competent basketball player again, that sooner or later he's going to turn back into a good fantasy option. He always has been. And he still rebounds well. He still gets defensive stats. He still gets assists. He's being more aggressive and scoring a bit more now as well. So I would expect him to settle in around the fantasy point per minute, if not more. And if he's going to play 34, 35 minutes in competitive games, that's still going to be a really solid projection at this price point.
And he also had 5 personal fouls last game. So there's a couple of things working against him in that spot against Toronto. But most notably, yeah, he probably would have played 35-ish minutes or so had the game been closer. And he looks just so much healthier now than he did earlier in the year. Now, also, other players on the Nets, Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, there's always individual upside in these guys. I just haven't been rostering them very much as of late. Should I be playing them today, though?
I haven't been either. Durant's still pretty expensive at 11-1. Kyrie at 9,200 is, I think, the one that starts to look interesting before Durant does. Still only played 28 minutes last game. Did lose 4 to the blowout. Didn't close the first half. So, I don't know. It's kind of a weird situation to me because I do think they're pretty clearly limiting his minutes a bit, after his absence. But at the same time, it wasn't an injury-related absence. So I expect that sooner than later, we're just going to get a game that Kyrie goes out there and plays 37, 38 minutes, just like he was before his suspension. And I don't necessarily think it's going to have to be this incremental buildup where he goes, 28, 30, 32, 36. Like, I think there's just going to be a game where it's just like, shit, I didn't have enough Kyrie at 9,200 for him to play 38 minutes. I don't know if that's tonight or not, but whereas you have Durant still basically priced for Kyrie to be out, which makes it really difficult to want to get to him, there's at least an argument or a path you can make for Kyrie where it's just like, all right, if nobody's going to play him at 9,200, like if you knew he was going to play 37 minutes tonight, he would at the very least be a very strong tournament play at that price point. If nobody's going to play him there and you want to say like, all right, hopefully tonight's the night, I'll take my chances on Kyrie, I think that's fine. Just be aware that based on recent rotations, there's a good chance that you're getting 32, 33.
The FanDuel one is really appealing to me, and I think he made a good case for the DraftKings one as well. But on FanDuel, he is point guard and shooting guard eligible, and he's 8,600 as opposed to 92, and people aren't playing him there. That to me feels like so close to a floor price for Kyrie Irving. $8,600. The multi-position eligibility doesn't have on DraftKings. I think that's where I'd want to be getting exposure to Kyrie. Just 8,600 price tag, multi-position eligibility, good matchup against the Pacers. It's an incorrect price. There's just no way that price sticks for too much longer. $8,600. So I think FanDuel can make a really strong case for Kyrie.
Yeah, I agree.
Let's move on to the Pacers side of the game. And from the Pacers, we've got the same scenario in the front court that we had the other day, which is Isaiah Jackson is questionable coming into today. We also have Andrew Nembhard questionable, less impactful. But with Isaiah Jackson out, we saw a big game for Miles Turner last time out. And it was something that you and I thought was a possibility where if there's no Isaiah Jackson, also they're playing a big team. They were going against the Timberwolves, where it was a Karl-Anthony Towns, Rudy Gobert front court. So we saw 33 minutes out of Miles Turner. And that was, I think, close to the most he's played the entire year. Yeah, there was one game against Orlando. He played 34. So we saw a little bit of an uptick in minutes, 33. If Isaiah Jackson's out, is this just what we should expect from Turner?
I think so, yeah, because this was another situation where, like, Isaiah Jackson, at least for the last few weeks, has been used purely as Turner's backup. Every minute that Turner's not on the floor, more or less, Jackson's out there and vice versa. So there was a chance that they were going to just say, like, all right, Goga Batadze is going to play, 19 minutes now. But I thought there was a better chance that you were going to get, 13, 14 minutes out of Goga, and that would mean Turner's playing more. And that's what we saw. Played 32 and a half minutes, subbed out with about a minute and a half to go in a non-competitive game. So if that game goes down to the wire, you probably do get 34 minutes there. I think projecting around 32 if Jackson is out makes sense. I think if Jackson is in, you're projecting like 29. And for somebody that averages around 1.25 fantasy points per minute, that's a pretty noteworthy increase to your projection.
Yeah, and then one other thing too about the Pacers, they've been decent this year because Miles Turner is good, Tyrese Halliburton's good. They're fifth in the Eastern Conference. This is a team that's very much in the playoff mix. There was this assumption they were just going to be tanking coming into the year, and some of the rotations early on indicated that was something they could have been doing. They just started winning games. And now I think this is a team that probably doesn't have much intention to trade Buddy Hield or trade Miles Turner. They're going to be trying to compete for a playoff spot, which I think is live. I don't think that they're significantly worse than teams like the Knicks. I think they're about comparable. And a lot of that is because Turner's really good and Halliburton's really good. And Halliburton's somebody who the prices come up a little bit, but I still think a playable salary, somebody who has upside. I get to like 10-ish% of Tyrese Halliburton a lot of times when I'm building out 150 lineups. Where does Halliburton fit into this slate for you?
Yeah, I mean, I still think he looks pretty good. He's a 1.35 to 1.4 DraftKings point per minute guy. He averages around 34 minutes per game, but you do get some games where he plays more. Last game, he played 35, would have played like 37 if he needed to be on the floor until the end. So there is that upside in terms of minutes in addition to production for him. Only 5% ownership looks good as well. Buddy Hield, kind of the same thing. Not getting a lot of ownership, averaging around 32 to 33 minutes per game, but does get some where he plays 35. He's a point per minute guy. And then one spot that I do think is really interesting today, we've seen in each of their last couple of games, Indiana play a little bit smaller. 2 games ago against, I think it was Orlando, Jalen Smith started the first half, started the second half, never came back in after his initial stint. In that game, you got a lot of extra minutes for TJ McConnell playing alongside Halliburton. Last game, Jalen Smith closed the first half, but he still didn't play at all in the fourth quarter. So you only got 22 minutes from Smith, and that was against a bigger Minnesota team, so it kind of surprised me. But In that game, what you saw was Benedict Mathurin get to 33 minutes and just play a ton. He subbed in both in the first and second half, partway through the first quarter, and then played the entire rest of the half. If Indiana is going to start kind of skewing towards some of these smaller lineups, and again, we're just talking about rotations over a couple of games, but the reason that it really stands out to me here is that, for one, they did it against a bigger Minnesota team where you wouldn't expect them to. And then today, you're talking about a Brooklyn team that doesn't even have a center. I mean, Claxton sort of, but like they don't have any true size that you really have to combat. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if maybe you do see those extra minutes again for Mathurin, who's only $5,700.
Anything else you want to talk about from Indiana?
Nope.
All right, today's show is sponsored by Prize Picks. And if you guys haven't signed up at Prize Picks yet, use our link. Use the code that we have to sign up, because when you do, you're going to get up to a $100 bonus on your first deposit and 1 free month of Stokastic Plus Platinum. So all the tools we have for pretty much every single sport out there. And also over at Stokastic, we've got our player props tool. We've got a Prize Picks specific player props tool. It's going to give you projections on all of the different player props, percentage odds from them to go over or under those numbers, to help you build the best prop cards you could possibly make and make some money over at Prize Picks. But when you do sign up, use our promo code, 1 free month Stokastic Plus Platinum, and you also get up to a $100 bonus on your first deposit. The next game we have on the slate, the New Orleans Pelicans against the Memphis Grizzlies, and some injury news from New Orleans because CJ McCollum, he is out. He is in the COVID protocols. And then in addition, we have Trey Murphy listed as questionable. So we know McCollum isn't playing, potential for Murphy to be out. It's generally kind of hard to figure out where the usage is going to be allocated on this team, but we'll start with the usage conversation, then we'll move on to some of the value pieces. With McCollum out, how does that change the outlook for guys like Zion Williamson and Brandon Ingram?
It, at the very least, opens the door for them to have more opportunities. Like, they're still competing with each other for touches and usage, but you're taking a mid-20s usage guy off the floor, McCollum. You're taking a primary playmaker off the floor, so you're likely to have the ball in Brandon Ingram's hands a bit more as well. So it certainly makes them both look a little bit better than they would if McCollum were in.
Yeah, and it's a spot where, as of late, I was really high on Zion coming into the year from a fantasy standpoint. From a real life standpoint, obviously, I'm still super high on him, but I've soured a little bit on his fantasy upside this year when everybody's healthy. I feel good about his upside with McCollum not playing. I think there is an opportunity for a lot of usage to go to Zion, which we saw last game. We saw Zion in the last spot where we saw McCollum being a late scratch going up against the Spurs. Only 27 minutes for Zion because the game was a blowout, but he had a 34.5% usage rate, 32 points, 11 rebounds. So as far as pay up options go on the team, he's going to be my priority over Ingram. But on the cheap end, Jose Alvarado is very, very chalky today. So the presumed starter in place of McCollum started last game, and we see Alvarado right now. Herb Jones actually also really popular over on FanDuel. So Herb Jones project for 41% ownership on FanDuel, Alvarado for 39%, and then for DK at $3,800, Alvarado is projected for 46% ownership, when not a single other player is projected for north of 23. So Alvarado, Herb Jones, both benefiting. What do you make of them as popular options?
Yeah, so to quickly touch on your Zion point too, Zion's played 105 minutes this year now without McCollum on the floor. 33.9% usage rate, 20% assist percentage, 1.4 DraftKings points per minute. Ingram's played 156, 30.8% usage rate, 27.9% assist percentage, 1.26 DraftKings points per minute. So certainly beneficial for both of those guys. Joval also at 1.5 fantasy points per minute, 25% usage rate, 15% assist percentage. Obviously, you still have him contending with Larry Nance Jr. for minutes, but likely to see an uptick in production for him. I think as far as value goes, Alvarado looks good as long as he's starting. You got 30 minutes from him last game. He's played 164 minutes without McCollum on the floor this year, 0.84 DraftKings points per minute, 20% assist percentage. Not a high usage guy at 17.5%, but at that price, I think it's still going to be fine. If you're looking for a pivot away from him, I think the natural guy is Devontae Graham. Graham also played 28 minutes last game, shared the floor with him a bit, also backed him up. Devontae Graham, 165 minutes without McCollum on the floor, 0.97 DraftKings points per minute. So I'm perfectly fine with Alvarado getting a ton of ownership. I don't know why $3,800 Alvarado is 46% owned and $3,500 Graham is not owned.
Yeah, I think that makes sense too as a potential pivot option. And then one that does confuse me a little bit is all of the ownership going to Herb Jones, particularly over on FanDuel, where, you could obviously make a case for the defensive stats that Herb Jones is more upside on FanDuel and DraftKings. but I don't know that he should be 41% owned on FanDuel at $4,600 when on DraftKings he is 22% owned at $4,500. So it would be a different scenario if Trey Murphy is also ruled out. But I don't know. Herb Jones, to me, that's too much ownership on FanDuel. Do you see it differently?
No, I don't really get it. Like he can play a little bit more if Marshall's out, I guess, but it's not like Herb Jones is a guy that is likely to really benefit from McCollum. It's not going to be like, oh, and like Brandon Ingram and Zion and Joval aren't going to be like, oh, well, instead of us just taking some of these extra shots, we're just going to give the ball to Herb Jones. Like that's not going to happen. Maybe if all of these guys were out, you could get some like Herb Jones running point, which we saw at times last year when they were really shorthanded. And, it's kind of just a reminder that like all NBA players are insanely good and when given the opportunities can make things happen. But you're not going to get Herb Jones running point when Brandon Ingram's out there or when Zion's out there, or like it's just not, he's not going to become a focal point of this offense just because McCollum's out. He's played 95 minutes without him this year, 16.2% usage rate, 7.8% assist percentage. I agree that Herb Jones is cheap, and if he plays, low to mid 30s, he projects as a perfectly fine value. I don't think there's anything that explains why he's getting this much ownership, though.
Yeah, that's how I feel as well. It's just way too popular for me, particularly on FanDuel, DraftKings to a lesser extent as well. Now, on the other side of the game, there's some injury news as well because John Conchar is questionable. That comes in addition to Santi Aldama being doubtful and Desmond Bane remaining out. Does any additional value open up for Memphis if Conchar is not able to play?
Probably not too much. Like I would kind of just expect those minutes to get spread around to other not particularly useful guys. You do have Aldama questionable too, so like you are getting pretty shorthanded there. But I would expect that you're getting like Laravia and Roddy splitting up those minutes. If you really wanted to try and punt with one of them and hope to like run good on shooting, I guess that's fine. I think Tyus Jones probably plays more, but he's 5,800, so not a whole lot you can do there.
And then as far as pay-up options go, Morant, Jaren Jackson Jr., anything that you like from Memphis outside of some of the potential cheaper guys?
I like Morant and Jackson. They are getting a little bit more expensive, but without Desmond Bane, John Morant is just insanely good and can play more minutes as well. Jaren Jackson, obviously we know is good. He played 28 minutes last game. I think typically you're going to project him around that 27, 28-minute mark just because you do have to keep in mind that he's frequently going to get himself in foul trouble, but he's a very high upside player. Last game we saw 34 minutes from John Morant. That was the game where he went from doubtful to questionable to playing. We had seen in the previous games without Bane that you were very live to get like 36 minutes from Morant, whereas for the season he's averaging around 33. You get that increased usage. So he is getting really expensive. He's not getting any ownership, but I do think if you find enough value to get there, Morant is still a really high upside option.
Let's move on to the Lakers and Spurs game. And guys, if you haven't done it yet, do us a big favor, like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. So Lakers and Spurs, all indications seem to be that LeBron James is going to play today, which of course means that the Lakers have listed him as questionable because why wouldn't they? So LeBron is questionable, AD is probable. I'm assuming LeBron plays. Are you under the same impression? And what does that mean for the Lakers?
Yeah, I'm under the same impression, and it means that this terrible team is even more terrible. Not from a basketball standpoint, from a DFS standpoint.
Anthony Davis has had some really high upside as of late. And of course, LeBron and AD always individually have upside. I'm just going to prefer to spend up to other players if LeBron and AD are both out there sharing the ball. I think LeBron probably going to be somewhat limited his first game back. So I'm hoping he plays, and it's just one spot that I don't really have to concern myself with too much. In the event he does not play, is Anthony Davis somebody we're going back to?
Yeah, I think if LeBron doesn't play, you can go right back to Davis. I did want to compare because after we finished talking about Memphis, I had pulled up Morant's rates without Desmond Bane this year, and he's basically Luka Doncic. Morant has a 42% usage rate, 39% assist percentage, 1.6 DraftKings points per minute. So I think it's interesting to compare that to Anthony Davis without LeBron, because if LeBron gets ruled out, like right now we have Morant projected for 2% ownership. We have Davis projected around 5% with James in. If LeBron gets ruled out, just based off what we've seen recently, I think you're going to see people kind of flock to Davis. He's at 1.72 DraftKings points per minute without LeBron this year, so he's been even better than Morant without Bane. 32.5% usage rate. They're both going to look really good. I would just keep that in mind as a spot where, like, if you see the field really starting to prioritize Anthony Davis, John Morant's a really good pivot there. But if they both end up, still being relatively low owned because they are expensive, I would go Davis first if LeBron is out, and then Morant first if LeBron is in.
And then the Spurs going up against the Lakers. Zach Collins is questionable with that weird injury that you and I were trying to figure out the other day. Left fibula, non-displaced head fracture. Doug McDermott is questionable. Jordan Hall is questionable. This team never makes it simple on the injury report. Josh Richardson is doubtful. But just given where these guys are priced now and the fact that Vassell, Pirtle, Trey Jones, Keldon Johnson are all playing in the size of the slate, I don't really think the Spurs are a team I'm going to have all that much interest in.
Yeah, I don't think there's too much to like here. We didn't really get a good read on what the Jakob Poeltl rotation was going to look like last game, but we had seen plenty of it previously with Collins out. So, I think you're expecting around 30 minutes from Poeltl. Yeah, there's nothing that really stands out to me here.
Next game, the Cleveland Cavaliers against the Milwaukee Bucks. From the Cleveland side of the game, Karis LeVert is out. Kevin Love also remains out. He's got a fractured thumb. So we're looking at Cleveland, Garland and Mitchell, always going to be upside in between the two of them. Kind of hard to think it's going to happen consistently, though, just because both of them are such ball-dominant players and their production is going to overlap. But no LeVert, no Kevin Love definitely opens up other opportunities from Cleveland. Is there anything you really like from this team?
I wouldn't say really like, but I do think it's worth mentioning Chetty at 3,800. He's at the same exact price point as Jose Alvarado. And again, I'm going to preface this. I prefer Alvarado if you're just talking like who's the first guy you play in cash for sure, but even like a single entry tournament lineup or whatever. But with Alvarado getting all of that ownership, I do think it's interesting to pay attention to other value options in that price range that aren't getting any. And Chetty's not getting any ownership with better positional eligibility at the same price point, likely playing around 28 minutes, in a perfect, like if things go perfectly for Alvarado, he's probably playing north of 30, but that's no guarantee. There's a lot of ways where this could run out where Chetty and Alvarado end up playing very similar minutes, and one of them is just 45 times as popular as the other one.
Yeah, I think that definitely does make a whole lot of sense. And let's move on to the Milwaukee side of the game where I just haven't been playing a lot of these guys lately. Giannis is expensive. Drew Holiday, he's been priced up. If an insane amount of value opens up, then yeah, it could be easier to get to Giannis. But at least how things stand now, the same conversation that you and I have had about guys like Giannis, about Luka, it's hard for these guys to land in an optimal lineup when they're $2,000 more expensive than other superstars.
Yeah, exactly. Like you just get so much upside right now from that 9 to 10K or even 10-5 ish range that it's really difficult to pay an extra 2,000. Like to put it into context, Giannis this year 1.7 DraftKings points per minute. He is the best point per minute guy in the NBA when if you assume all teams are healthy. But for this slate, John Morant 1.6 for like $2,000 less. If LeBron sits, Davis is at that same rate as Giannis for 1,500 less. So it just becomes really difficult to prioritize him at these prices. I think that it's more appealing to build lineups around those like 9 to 10.5K guys.
So let's move on to the next one, the Sacramento Kings against the Boston Celtics. And another spot here, not a whole lot of injury news because the Kings, pretty much everybody is out there, not a single player on the injury report. Pretty rare at this point of the season. Sabonis and Fox, both fairly expensive. We've seen them with upside in a lot of recent games. But what do you make of them in this matchup against the Celtics?
De'Aaron Fox has been playing out of his mind this year. He's another guard in that like mid 9K range, just not getting any ownership. Does have a really high ceiling. Is going to be difficult to prioritize just because, the price point has gotten up there. Same goes for Sabonis. When he's not in foul trouble, you're likely getting around 34 minutes from him. He does foul a lot, so, you can't always count on that 34, 35 minutes, but he's around a 1.35, 1.4 fantasy point per minute guy. To me, if you get to him or Fox, they both look fine, but I wouldn't call them priorities. And then pretty much the same for the rest of this team. You've seen Terrence Davis basically not removed, but cut back a bit in the rotation, which has been good for the collective minutes of Harrison Barnes, Kevin Huerter, Keegan Murray, but they're all also, I think, pretty much correctly priced.
Yeah, and this game does have a super high total, which pretty much all Kings games this year, 238.5. So on one hand, I'm like, oh, Jason Tatum, he projects really well for me. And then I check his price point. He is 10,800 on DraftKings, a little cheaper on FanDuel at 10 but it's just a lot of pay for Jason Tatum, who's a very good fantasy producer, but is still a better real life player than he is fantasy player. I think ultimately by the time I'm building lineups, I'm just going to be playing guys who are a little bit cheaper than Tatum.
Yeah, like it's an appealing spot, but the issue I run into is just not only all the guys that Tatum is more expensive than, but I keep going back to John Morant being 1 to 2% owned at the same price as Tatum. I realize Tatum has a little bit more flexibility since he's small forward, power forward, but Tatum this year averaging 1.42 DraftKings points per minute, about 37 and a half minutes per game, that's obviously great, and you're happy if you get there. But to compare him to Morant, a couple extra minutes for Tatum, a, like 0.2 of a fantasy point per minute more production on average for Morant, and Tatum getting about 5% to Morant's 1. So Tatum, I think, some of you are certainly happy to get to, but there's just a lot, like I prefer getting to Morant if I can. And then there's also just all these, $9,400 guys that you can get to as well.
Yeah, and then also for the Celtics, Marcus Smart isn't on the injury report anymore. Malcolm Brogdon is playing. He was questionable for a little bit and also missed games. It's hard for me to get to any of the peripheral players on this team because while the matchup is really good and it's a game that's supposed to be played at a really high pace, this is a really just deep Celtics team that's healthy right now. So it would look like a really favorable spot on paper. I just don't know how much I'm going to get there.
Yeah, I think the guy I probably get to the most is Jaylen Brown, which that's typically the case for me. He is pulling the most ownership on this team as well at 11%. He's 8,500, shooting guard, small forward. You actually have a good Kings team here, so maybe the Celtics will play a competitive game. We've seen it a lot recently. Anybody that's been rostering Jaylen Brown gets off to a really good start. You're like, all right, cool, I have a lot of Jaylen Brown. And then he kind of just like doesn't do anything in the fourth and then turns into a blowout and doesn't quite get there. They're 8-point favorites here, so I mean, certainly could be the same sort of thing, but the Kings are a good team. Maybe they actually keep this competitive. I do think Brown's a little bit underpriced.
Let's talk about a familiar matchup, the Washington Wizards against the Miami Heat. I saw this on the schedule and I feel like these teams play each other every day. The reason is because this is the third time in the last week that they've been matched up against each other. And the injury reports just as screwed up as they've been every other time they've played each other in the last week. From the Wizards, Bradley Beal is questionable, Monty Morris is questionable, Rui Hachimura is questionable, Johnny Davis is questionable. We just need more information here. I don't know what to make of this team when you've got three very important pieces listed as questionable.
Yeah, exactly. And it kind of just all changes. Like last game, you had Morris out and you had Beal out. Jordan Goodwin got the start, played 25 minutes, didn't really do anything, didn't play at all down the stretch. Will Barton got those minutes. That's not a guarantee. We had seen earlier in the year that Goodwin was taking minutes from Barton. Barton overall has been really bad this year. I kind of laughed about it because I didn't play that slate, but I saw somebody complaining about Goodwin on Twitter and somebody else saying that Will Barton was the obvious play. And it's just like, so you obviously weren't on Barton all of the other times you could have been because he's been wildly disappointing in this role so far. So between the two of them, though, like if Beal and Morris are out, one of them is very likely to have a good game, if not both. But yeah, like it all, there's just so many moving parts here because if Beal's out too, you're talking about more production for Porzingis. You're talking about more opportunities for Kuzma, more playing time for Kispert, who played 39 minutes. So yeah, it's a lot of moving parts for this team.
And I don't even know it's possible to talk about the Heat on any strategy shows for the foreseeable future. Even the deep dive, we don't know when you and I have done that show together because you don't know who's playing for the Heat. You don't know who's starting until like 15 minutes before their game starts. So there could be value that opens up here. But Tyler Hero is questionable. Gabe Vincent is questionable. Dwayne Dedmon is questionable. Then we got Max Strus doubtful. Duncan Robinson is doubtful. Jimmy Butler's out. I'm sure there's going to be value here because players get ruled in, get ruled out constantly for the Heat. And oftentimes it's the players who are probable that get ruled out. It's the players who are like doubtful that get ruled in. The whole thing is a mess. I don't know what to make of it. Just watch our content we have later in the day because I think there's going to be value here. I just don't know exactly who it is. But do you have any strong takeaways from the Heat at this time of the day?
No, I mean, at least we saw Tyler Hero come back last game. I thought he got like seriously hurt in that game too, but it turned out I think he just landed on his tailbone. He was down like on the baseline, and one of the Miami guys ran in and like dove in front of the camera basically. So I thought we had like a broken leg, but turned out he didn't. So he was back. That was good, I guess. But yeah, it's the same thing here where you have Dedmon, Hero, and Vincent questionable. If the questionable guys don't play and the doubtful guys don't play, then you have like 7 bodies. And you're just talking about jamming in as much Miami as you can. If all those guys play, then obviously it looks a lot different, and you're talking more about like decent plays, but not the same level of priority.
Yeah, so like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, check out the stuff we have later because this game, Washington, Miami, low total, but there's so many players on the injury report. I assume there's going to be some sort of value. We just need to know more information in terms of injury updates to know for sure. The next game that we have here is the Atlanta Hawks against the Houston Rockets, and the Rockets have been good for any player that's been ailing from a fantasy standpoint at all this year. DeJounte Murray, he's been in a big downswing as far as fantasy points are concerned. We saw him picking up kind of a weird amount of ownership last game that neither you or I really agreed with. But at least for today, it's become a little bit more muted. DeJounte Murray projected for 7% ownership over on DraftKings, 8% over on FanDuel. Could this be a bounce back spot for DeJounte Murray in another good matchup against the Rockets?
Yeah, for sure. Like he's still a really, really good player, and he's still averaging around 1.15 to 1.2 DraftKings points per minute this year. The price is reasonable at 9,100. I don't mind getting into some Murray. I do think that it's interesting. Trae Young is only 1% owned at 10K. So, he's been around a 1.35 to 1.4 fantasy point per minute guy. That's just another really high upside guard that I like the idea of getting to. But yeah, I like Murray. I like Young. I mean, I'm going to really like this whole team, basically.
Any of the guys outside of Young and Murray that stand out above the other ones? John Collins, Clint Capella, Hunter, any of those guys they're really eyeing?
Collins and Capella in particular. Collins played 32 minutes last game, which was a little disappointing because we had seen his playing time trending up to where you were getting, 34 minutes pretty frequently in recent games. But at least it was 32 and not 26 or 27. I think you can pretty comfortably project around 32 for Collins, knowing that he can get a couple of extra minutes. He's still pretty cheap. He's averaging around 0.85 DraftKings points per minute this year. You expect that to be a little bit higher in this matchup. And then Clint Capella at 6,700, also likely to give you 28, 29 minutes. He's about a 1.15 DraftKings point per minute guy in a good matchup. So I just really like the ceiling you get from these guys. And to me, this game is sort of similar to the Sacramento game where, when we talked about Sacramento-Boston, you really would like to get the guys from that game. The pricing just isn't really that favorable. In this game, I think it is more favorable. Collins, I think, is a bit underpriced. I think Capella's probably a little underpriced. Murray's probably a little underpriced. Trae Young is fair. So I think this game's just going to be a lot easier for me to get to.
And then we have some actual injury news that we know for sure on the other side of the game. The last few injury spots have been a little bit questionable. This one, though, Şengün is doubtful for the Rockets tonight. We know Jae'Sean Tate remains out. Bruno Fernando is also questionable. In a scenario where Fernando is out in addition to Şengün, what are we looking at for value in the Houston front court?
So I'm guessing we get Garuba. Is that your assumption?
I would think so. I know he hasn't been as big of a part of the rotation as of late, but we've seen him in the starting lineup before, and we've seen him play extended minutes in the starting lineup. So bringing up Garuba, actually, it's been a while. Actually, it was the first game of the season where he started, because now I'm recalling where he started. He played 25 minutes, but the game was a blowout, and it was also kind of unexpected. He drew into the start, but Garuba also is not a bad fantasy producer, right around a fantasy point per minute. If we are going to get Garuba starting and playing potentially 26 to 28 minutes, he would be really strong looking to me.
Yeah, I agree. He's at a fantasy point per minute this year, 18.6% rebounding percentage, which is really nice to see. Typically playing the minutes that Şengün's not on the floor. And then you also have a big Atlanta front court. So it makes me think it's less likely that you get, because I think the two options here. I don't want to put too much past the Rockets because they can do whatever they want. They suck. But I think the two most likely options are either Garuba starts in place of Şengün or KJ Martin starts and Jabari Smith slides down. I think it's more likely they go Garuba. And if that's the case, he's going to look like a good value option here. Only projected for 12% ownership at 3,700. I feel like that should be a little bit higher. But you also should get more offensive opportunities for guys like Jalen Green, Kevin Porter Jr., Jabari Smith, because Şengün is such a big part of this offense. Şengün's got a 24% usage rate this year. Usman Garuba's 12%, 12.1% assist percentage for Şengün as well. So I do think it's going to open up some more usage for that backcourt, maybe for Jabari Smith, although he's just been awful in general this year. But without Şengün on the floor, 30.3% usage rate for Porter, 28.8 for Green. So not huge bumps, but I do think that you could see that number come up a little bit.
And then as for the other players on the team, Jalen Green, he's on the injury report, but he's probable, so no real concerns there. We know he's going to shoot a lot. He's been disappointing from an efficiency standpoint, especially how he finished last year. But Jalen Green, Kevin Porter, do any of these guys see any kind of usage bump with there being no Şengün tonight?
Yeah, so it's like 30 and change for Porter, 29 for Green when Şengün is not on the floor. When Şengün is on the floor, 25.7% for Green, 24.1 for Porter. So nice bump for both of those guys. Eric Gordon also, 15.2% usage rate with Şengün on the floor this year, 20% with him off. Jabari Smith pretty much stays around the same, 17.8% to 18.1%. That probably has a lot to do with his inability to actually make the ball go in the basket when he does shoot it. But yeah, I think that there's a nice uptick here for Porter, for Green, even for Eric Gordon.
And then one other guy that I think has, to me, the best front court prospect that the Rockets have outside of Şengün, I think Tari Eason could be really good. And we've also seen him at times just get extended minutes. and be a really good fantasy producer. So overall for the year, he's playing 18 and a half minutes per game, scoring about 20 and a half fantasy points. If this is one of those spots where we actually get 24, 26 minutes from Tari Eason, I think there's upside there. It's hard to trust just because they don't give him minutes consistently, but he should be playing more considering where the team's at, and he's shown promise. So he's somebody that in large field tournaments, I don't mind taking shots on.
Yeah, I really like that call. He's 4K, power forward on DraftKings, 1.13 DraftKings points per minute this year. It's basically a situation where even if he just plays his normal 20-ish minutes, he can give you a decent score at 4K. And if he just happens to play well and run into more minutes, he's going to look really good. Obviously, he's another one that I think looks better if Fernando is out. If Fernando's in, then this all just becomes messy because you don't know exactly how it's going to be split between Garuba Fernando. It makes it less likely that you're getting, extra Tari Eason minutes. So hopefully Fernando sits, but that piece does, I think, matter.
Let's move on to the next game. A few left to talk about. This one is the Chicago Bulls against the Oklahoma City Thunder. Now, for Chicago, the offense has been a mess between DeRozan, Levine, Vooch. We never really know where the usage is going to end up going. And in addition to that, the offense has been amongst the worst in the NBA in adjusted offensive efficiency. So they're struggling to figure that out. But the prices have come down. So as a result, Vooch is projected for 24% ownership on ZK. He's actually the second most popular player on the slate. Even Andre Drummond, who you've shouted out as being a potential low-owned value option, he's popular today. He's projected for 17% ownership right now. So we've got some pieces on the Bulls that are actually picking up ownership. Levine being another one around 10% with his price point having dropped. What do you make of the Bulls now that because of some of their struggles, guys like Levine and Vooch are less expensive?
It makes them look really good, especially going up against an OKC team where Vooch and Drummond should just be getting every single missed shot. Like they should be rebounding at a really, really good rate here. So I like them both. I mean, seeing 17, 18% ownership come into Andre Drummond at 4K, knowing the expectation is that he's going to play like 16 minutes is a little bit wild. But at the same time, I just think he's going to grab like every single rebound while he's on the floor. And if anybody's going to double in 15, 16 minutes, it's Andre Drummond here. So I get why he's getting some ownership. I do think it's probably a little bit higher than it should be, but we also have him with a 14% chance of being optimal. He just looks good in this spot. Vooch at 7,500, still obviously looks really good as well. I like the price tag on Levine. I like the price tag on DeRozan as well. I don't think they're quite as interesting because, OKC does actually have decent defenders, and not to say that like Levine can't torch them and, same for DeRozan, but the reason I really like the Vooch Drummond combo is just that I don't think they have anything to match up with them inside.
And the Drummond ownership, I assume, is going to be lower by the time the slate starts. It's inevitable that on a 13-game slate, players are going to be ruled out at the 1:30, 5:30 Eastern time, injury report updates. And then once other value opens up, Drummond's going to go back to being like that 5% owned player or something like that. So I wouldn't read too much into his ownership right now. Anybody who's watching this later in the day, there's a good chance Drummond is not actually projected to be a somewhat chalky value play. Anything else you want to bring up from Chicago?
Nope.
Let's talk about OKC then. And we know SGA is going to play big minutes. We could reasonably assume that Giddey's going to. Every few games, we see a weird Giddey rotation scenario. But in general, SGA's minutes, super secure. Giddey's fairly secure. The rest of the players on the roster, no clue what to make of any of them. Is there anything that you think we should be looking at outside of Giddey or SGA from OKC?
No, that's typically one of the easiest things to say no to. If you wanted to go to anything else, I think Dort and Pokusevski are the next guys up. Poku came back, started last game, played about 26 minutes in regulation. He's 5K. If you happen to get the random game where he plays 36, then he's clearly underpriced at 5K. If he plays his normal minutes, then he's just sort of a neutral play. So it's a spot where if you want to gamble on Poku, I think that's fine. But SGA, pretty clearly the guy that you're going to feel the best about here. They, knock on wood, haven't screwed with his minutes this year. He is getting expensive, so he's only getting 6% ownership at 10-2. But this is a guy that averages, 1.4 to 1.45 DraftKings points per minute in 35 to 36 minutes per game. Giddey, the only guy pulling ownership, 7K, 19% ownership. It's kind of the same thing we saw the other day. There's a lot of guards that we like, but most of them are in this like $9,000 to $10,500 range. And then you just have Giddey sitting there at 7K, averaging like 1.1 DraftKings points per minute, hopefully playing 34 minutes. So I understand why he's getting ownership here.
Anything else from OKC you want to talk about? I think that's probably does it.
Oh, wish they would relegate this team.
Yeah. Today's show, while it's sponsored by Prize Picks, you guys might not be in a state where you could play on Prize Picks. The reason being, is because there's a kind of fun dynamic where in legal sports betting states, you got legal sports betting. And then in sportsbook, in states that don't have sports books, you could usually go to Prize Picks. So if you're in a state that doesn't have sports betting, look at our sponsor, Prize Picks. But if you're in a state like Adam, where Maryland just legalized sports betting, you could sign up at BetMGM by clicking on the link that we have below. It's also going to be thrown into the YouTube chat. And if you sign up, a couple of good benefits. First of all, you could get a risk-free bet of up to $1,000, or the current no-brainer offer that we have right now, where it's really simple. You bet on the World Cup, you bet a money line, and you place a $10 bet. Regardless of what happens in that game, you're going to get paid out $200. So it's a no-brainer, easy way to make some money. So take advantage of these opportunities before they go away. It's only going to be here for another couple of weeks or so. It is $10, and you're going to get $200 for free, just a money line bet on any World Cup game. I know the language is a little confusing. It's as long as a goal is scored, it'll say on the landing page, but that just means as long as there's a goal scored in any World Cup game, there's already been a goal scored. So it's going to pay out $200 just when you sign up. Make sure to click on our link. Few games left to hit on, and the next one is the Detroit Pistons against the Phoenix Suns. And is Cade Cunningham just not all that valuable right now? Because the Pistons are looking a hell of a lot better without him. But one thing that is going to make this team pretty complicated for at least the purposes of our conversation right now, Cade Cunningham is out, but Jaden Ivey is questionable. Killian Hayes is questionable. Hamidou Diallo is questionable. Do you have any real takeaways from here, or do we just need injury updates?
I mean, I think we need injury updates. If all those guys are out, then you're talking about a lot of usage being available for anybody on the floor. Alec Burks probably doing a ton. Corey Joseph, I guess, playing minutes. But yeah, it's a situation where, like, if Ivy is out, Hayes is in, then Hayes, I guess, looks better. I don't know how good Killian Hayes can ever truly look, but he would look better. You're getting more usage, I would expect, for Bogdanovich. Not somebody that necessarily you're expecting to create, which is sort of the issue if Ivy and Hayes end up being out. But yeah, it's really, really dependent on how this injury news breaks.
It's also a brutal matchup against the Phoenix Suns. The spread is currently 12.5 points. So even if guys this is where it gets complicated. And I'm kind of curious where your thoughts are on this, because let's say Ivy and Hayes are both ruled out. We could assume there'd be more ownership or more usage going to Bogdanovich. But at the same time, too, the spread for this game could be like 16 points at that point. How concerned would you be about a blowout? I know we don't usually weigh it too much, but the spread could be absurd in this game.
Yeah, and it's just it would really scare me because you're just running out of playmakers. Like, you could really just get one of those games where the Pistons score like 70 points because, like, Bojan Bogdanović is a good shooter, but if he's like the only guy on the floor that the Suns have to worry about scoring and they don't have like a point guard that can get him the ball, then who really cares? It does strike me as a spot where you could just get like a true, Detroit doesn't score enough points. I do think the center rotation is still interesting. $4,500 for Marvin Bagley, $4,200 for Duren. Duren once again played about 27 minutes last game. He was on the floor at the end of the game again. Good fantasy producer. This is one spot that I think has been kind of difficult to get to recently because you do sort of have to split the minutes from a projection standpoint. But I do think at the same time, when you think about the volatility and the upside here, it consistently is going under-owned because you're very likely to get 27, 28 minutes from one of Bagley or Duren, who are both good point per minute guys, both cheap and both not popular. Duren would be the one that I expect to be playing down the stretch in garbage time too, which is nice.
Yeah, I would assume that as well, especially considering first round pick. They haven't really gotten him the extended minutes with regularity. It could be a scenario where they're able to give him those minutes. Now, on the other side of the game, Chris Paul, he's still out. He's dealing with heel soreness. If this was a higher leverage game, I think he would have played. And actually, even if they were playing most teams that weren't the Pistons, I think he probably would have played. He practiced, I believe it was Wednesday. They had a team practice, and Chris Paul went through it and apparently didn't have any issues. But a game where they're massive favorites, they didn't need to push it. Chris Paul is going to sit out one more game. I think he'll be back either over the weekend or on Monday, whenever they play next. What stands out from the Suns without Chris Paul out there again?
Yes, I mean, we've seen prices adjust, but we've also seen that, you're getting a lot of additional playing time for some guys. Shamet is still out as well. Not really any ownership coming in here, which I think is kind of interesting because, yeah, there's a good chance that Phoenix just beats the hell out of Detroit here. But if that happens, there's also a pretty good chance that one of these guys just has a game, over the course of 3 quarters. Booker's gotten pretty expensive. $9,900. I like Devin Booker, but I also think that that's not, like totally different than Trae Young. It's not different than, a lot of other guys priced up there. But DeAndre Ayton at 7,200, I still think is interesting here. He should have his way with Marvin Bagley and the Pistons front court. Cameron Payne at 7,300, no ownership, still looks fine. So certainly not the same level of priority for Phoenix that we've had previously. But I do think there's some interesting tournament plays here. One thing that I do think is really interesting to point out and touch on is, once again, we got Bismack Biyombo last game as the backup center behind Ayton. So that now is 2 games in a row that's happened. Biyombo's $3,100. No ownership. I mean, that's kind of interesting to me, just, hoping that he gets a few extra minutes, game gets out of hand. He's a good point per minute guy, and we've seen him basically just pass Landale in the rotation.
And by the one note on Cade Cunningham, just because I think it's of interest. I was reading a story earlier. Apparently, the Pistons are leaning towards shutting him down for the season at this point, which, I mean, I guess tanking purposes, and then I guess that shin injury is fairly severe. So that this could be a very one-sided game. But Booker always does look better in the absence of Chris Paul, and could be one final game for him without Paul out there. A couple games left to hit on. The next one, the Utah Jazz against the Golden State Warriors. The Jazz have definitely been one of the more surprising teams to open up the year, but they've looked worse without Mike Conley on the court, and that should be expected. He's the best player on this team alongside Lauri Markkanen. Now, in the backcourt, Colin Sexton's been starting. We've also seen extra minutes go to guys like THT and Malik Beasley at times. Who's the standout option for you with Conley out at least one more game?
So I still like getting to a cheap $4,600 Sexton. He's, I think, just still a little bit underpriced. He's pulling 20% ownership. Clarkson, Markkanen, Vanderbilt all getting ownership as well. Beasley has gotten a little expensive at 4,900. I do still like the playing time that you're getting there. But I think Utah in general just looks really good. Sexton's the guy I probably get to first.
And then anything else from the Jazz that's standing out to you? Like, I love Markkanen. He's just really expensive now.
Yeah, same. I think everybody else is kind of just like solid enough secondary options. It's a good matchup against Golden State. They play at a fast pace, but the prices are pretty much where they should be. And one thing that we've talked about a lot with Utah is that they do run their starters a little bit like shorter rotations than most other teams. Markkanen averages around 33 minutes per game for the season, played 34 and a half last game. Clarkson averages around 31. He did play 37 last game, so you've seen an uptick for him with Conley out as well. That's certainly notable. Sexton played 35. So you did get more minutes for these guys last game in particular, but you always have to be a little bit worried about them going back to the rotations that they've run previously.
And on the Warriors side of the game, Steph Curry is having an outstanding fantasy season. Other guys are just kind of there. They just kind of exist. Klay Thompson, Andrew Wiggins, Jordan Poole, Draymond Green. I really haven't played any of these guys as of late, unless there's been some sort of injury scenario for the Warriors. Klay Thompson got off to a really hot start in the last game for the Warriors, but then kind of cooled off and didn't really do much in the second half. He's a reasonable price point at $6K on FanDuel, $58 on DK. So if I would get to him in a couple lineups, I would be okay with that. But I don't really see anything that stands out from the Warriors.
Yeah, I don't think there's like true priorities. I certainly am happy getting to whatever Steph I can. He's averaging 1.6 DraftKings points per minute this year. So similar price point, similar production to John Morant without Bane. Like getting there. If you get to some Draymond at 5,900, that's fine. 5,800 for Thompson looks fine as well. Draymond is running with the second unit now, so that is potentially good for him. Just having the ball in his hands more. The downside is we've actually seen in the past, in previous years, in games where Curry is out, that it would actually hurt Draymond because he doesn't have Curry to pass to. So kind of interested to see how it goes with that second unit. But I do think from a rotational standpoint, it's interesting to note that Draymond's playing there now.
In the last game on the slate, it is the Denver Nuggets against the Los Angeles Clippers. So from Denver, we saw the MVP type Jokic in the last game, but there was also a game where there was no Jamal Murray, there was no Michael Porter Jr., which you correctly called. You'd said on the show that was what you thought they were going to do, and it is what they ended up doing. But for today, Jamal Murray is back, but Michael Porter Jr. remains questionable. So it seems he's dealing with an actual injury, and it wasn't just rest for him last time out. What do you make of this team if Porter doesn't play? Is there anybody that would step into the starting lineup and really stand out to you?
Bruce Brown, probably. I don't know about the really standout part. He's 5,900 now, and you're still talking about Murray and Jokic being active. My assumption, though, is that Brown would step in and start. I think that's kind of just who they're going to go to pretty much whenever they can.
And then Jokic, like we said, he had that standout game last time out. It did go to overtime, which inflated his numbers a little bit, but still it was reminiscent of what Jokic did during his MVP season. He ended up finishing with 65 fantasy points in 43 minutes, just an assist shy of the triple-double, or else he would have been up to 70 fantasy points. Do you like getting back to him, or are we going to see his role take a little bit of a step back with Murray active?
I do expect the role to take a little bit of a step back just because, that's what we've seen all year, and you expect it to be the case. So I do think it's pretty difficult to get to a lot of Jokic here just because he is center only. He's 11-4, 1.6 DraftKings points per minute, give or take. So basically in line with Steph and, Morant, who are less expensive. Jamal Murray at 7K, I think kind of tough to get to. I don't find Denver very appealing here.
And then what a mess the Clippers are on the other side. Kawhi Leonard, he's out. Nobody knows what's going on with him. Paul George, he's out. It's some sort of different injury that he's picking up all the time these days. What stands out from the Clippers with there being no Paul George or Kawhi Leonard? By the way, also, we have no Luke Kennard who remains out. Any standout value plays from the Clippers?
There's plenty of opportunities to go around here. Obviously, this team is sort of a mess. We have ownership coming into Zubats at 6,400, Morris at 5,900, Mann at 3,800. So Mann at 3,800 still pretty cheap. I like that. Morris at 5,900 should play more minutes and get some increased usage as well. John Wall at 6K is kind of interesting to me, not getting any ownership. In their last game, he only played 20 and a half minutes, but he's been really, really productive when he's on the floor when the Clippers are shorthanded. So I think that's kind of an interesting spot to just sort of gamble on and hope that he gets more minutes with no Kawhi, no George. That was sort of a weird game where they just ran pretty ugly rotations. So I'm not overly confident, but he did close the first half. Maybe plays more if that game's competitive. So kind of interested in John Wall in tournaments.
Anything else you want to bring up from the Clippers?
Norman Powell played 29 minutes last game. He does have a 30% usage rate without George or Kawhi on the floor. He's 4,700. That's sort of interesting.
All right, that does it for us. One more time, guys, please like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't done it already. It is free for you, and it helps support us a whole bunch. Also, we've got a bunch of other content coming up. NFL on the Contrary, NFL matchup show. We've got the NBA Deep Dive, NBA Live Before Lock. So check out all of that. Good luck today. See y'all later.